Welcome back to the Social Enterprise Summit 2023. It is time to start our keynote session. The topic is on aligning actors around the promotion of sustainable well-being for all. Now, after years of COVID, a lot of our lives have been disrupted. As we can see from a business point of view, we have very flexible working environments and working hours as well. And of course, other than those transformations, how can we incorporate well-being into business, into our daily lives using different perspectives? Well, up next, we will be looking into the issue from a global perspective to a local context, spanning from a Hong Kong corporate angle, from arts and culture, policy research, to private sectors. And we are especially thrilled to have the Honorable Bernard Charnwood-Chan, Chairperson of Hong Kong Council of Social Service, Chairman of M+ Museum, to deliver his keynote speech. So please give a big hand to the Honorable Bernard Charnwood-Chan.
Good afternoon. Being the first speaker after lunch is always the most challenging one, because it's my job to entertain you for the next, do I have 30 minutes? Something like that, or more. How much time do I have? 10 minutes? Is that what? Oh, I only have 10 minutes? Gee, okay, that should be easy. 10 minutes should be easy, because how should I entertain you for the next 30 minutes of the whole session, because right after your lunch. Now, I've been asked to speak on this topic of sustainable well-being, and especially in the context of arts and culture. Now that I only have 10 minutes, I'm trying to think, what is the best way to put forward how important is arts and culture to the well-being of people? Now, you probably have heard from me in different occasions, me promoting West Kowloon Cultural District, how I promote M+. But let me tell you this piece of news. It is so important. So in one of my occasions, I spoke to the chief executive. Because how do I draw his attention that arts and culture is an important priority for Hong Kong? Now, equally, there are so many priorities, right? Housing is one, education is one, and you can name it. And why would arts and culture being top on the list? Let me just give you, for the next 10 minutes, why I think it is important. To start with, arts and culture is not just about arts and culture. I think typically you would think, okay, arts and culture, great, it's for people who enjoy arts and culture, performing art, visual art, music, dance, but it's way beyond that, okay? But to start with, I have to say, for the first time, Hong Kong now can claim we are at the same level as New York and London. You know, we are so often being compared, right? These other two cities are arguably the most important financial center in the world. Now, Hong Kong also try to claim that we are as important as New York and London. But London and New York is just not about making money. Now, it has always been Hong Kong DNA for decades and decades. This is the place to make money. Hong Kong is the place to make money. But that generation have moved on long ago now. It's long moved beyond just about making money. So in my pitch to the chief executive, I said, while we can consider arts and culture as arts and culture, but to me, it is also about retaining and attracting talents. We all know today is our single most important topics in Hong Kong, or you can say it's a crisis in Hong Kong. How are we going to be able to retain the talents and attracting new talents? So my observation is this. Today, especially after COVID, and of course with the introductions of technology and everything, in fact, you don't have to stay in one place to perform your job. You can be anywhere. So the single most important thing about a decision why our talents need to be made, yes, it's about the job, but you can fly for your jobs. You don't have to be in that location to perform the job. So what attracts that person to decide where he should go is no longer about him, but it's about his family. In fact, a lot of the time, the decision is also made by the spouse, as important as to the person that needs to work. So, and how would they decide? They will look at, obviously, the place they're going to move to. Number one consideration is whether the place, well, first, they do have to consider whether it's a job, but again, the job doesn't need to be in one location. They can commute Monday to Friday. But the most important thing is the place they're going to move to, number one, is it safe? So it got to be the first consideration is whether this place is safe. And then if they have family, then of course the other consideration is, well, are there good education for my children? Right? That got to be your other consideration. Then, is that place a place with culture? Right? Because if they want to move their family there, this place needs to be a place where they can actually learn something. They can experience the local culture. So arts and culture, the whole upbringing is also equally as important. And what else they will be interested to look at? Well, then of course, is this city embrace, increasingly now this is a very important topic, is about diversity. And can they respect each other's diversity? So they want to come to a place, they want to experience the local culture, but then how do we as different culture in a place like Hong Kong or other international city, how are these culture experiences can be coexisted? So these are all the things that the people look at when they're now looking about where they're going to locate themselves. So I told the chief executive that, listen, arts and culture, for the first time, it is actually part of the consideration for families. Right? It's not just simply about whether, I want to be a learned person. No, beyond that. It is something that I think is as important for us to attract, to retain, and to attract new talents to come. But because I need to prepare for today's events, although I don't actually prepare, but it forces me to think beyond just about my normal pitch. My normal pitch will be why arts and culture is important, then my other pitch is why it's important for us to attract talent. But thanks to Rebecca for inviting me to this, it forces me to think beyond that. So in fact, arts and culture is way beyond just the two topics I mentioned earlier. It has such an impact as well in other sectors. Let's just start with social sector. For social sector now, arts and culture, music and everything is also a means to address, SEN students or people with disability. It's a tool for us to engage with them. And then, of course, apart from the social sector, then even about the healthcare sector. Again, arts and culture often being used to address mental health, to reduce stress level. Corporate sector, business sector, often that is also a way to help with employees' well-being. This is the tool, how do we engage, and sometimes even to do with, it's a good corporate bonding exercise, allowing a tool for employees to get together. And not to mention about even in the social enterprise sector, this is often also a tool to address inequalities, cultural diversity. This is a mean and a tool. So arts and culture is only a language. To me, that's a language. And we need these types of language today to help us to bridge the divide. Now, just before I come here this morning, I was being interviewed by, let's just say, there was an interview this morning, and I was asked to address a topic that too often people ask me. In fact, as Hong Kong now opened back up to the world, too often people come back, first time come back after 3 years, after 2019, the social unrest and 2.5 years of COVID, now people start coming back. And quite often, the sort of question people ask me is like, do you still have freedom of expression? Right? Too often people ask me is that, do you have self-censorship in Hong Kong now? I don't blame them because the sort of news they read about Hong Kong overseas, you can only expect that these are the questions they ask. And how I address them, I say, well, I certainly think that there's still freedom of expression. But then the question now is, what is freedom? Does it mean you're free to say anything you want, even though you haven't said anything illegal, but doesn't mean that you're free to do so? Now, why I say this? I mean, I sit on the board of my college board in the U.S., and oh my goodness, in the last many years now, I feel that you have to be so politically correct in America today than here in this town. Anything you say incorrectly could get you into a lot of trouble. Everything's so sensitive. Everything about gender, ethnicity, religion. Oh my goodness. And then, of course, given what happened the last 2 weeks in the Middle East, is a huge divide in all quarters of the society. So if anyone tells me that there's freedom of expression, well, I'm not so sure today. I mean, of course, the colleges, we can continue to say that we respect freedom, but it's not without limit anymore. You cannot say things that you're going to be offensive. So similar to this town too, of course, not everyone's going to agree with everything. If you look at M+, contemporary art is not something for everyone. Even myself. Now, so I told this person who interviewed this morning, I said, listen, my job as a chair is not to dictate what goes in my museum. That's not my job. We leave it to our independent curatorial team. They do it professionally, so thank goodness I don't have any say to it, otherwise I would be blamed. No, leave it entirely to a curatorial team. My job, because it's a public institution, is to make sure that the money are well spent, right? And as well as I have to address the stakeholders, the different stakeholders. And my stakeholders are from, obviously, the taxpayers, to the government, to stakeholders in Hong Kong, and to the stakeholders elsewhere as well. And these days, what I worry most is how sometimes, especially in a divided society, so often people can weaponize. They can take advantage of certain image or certain thing, and they weaponize it for whatever reason. So my job is to try to minimize that, is to make sure that we can respect each other. It's so easy, so often so easy to say, but it's so difficult these days. I disagree with you and I disagree with you, and then, so the art is a language, and it's supposed to promote that different diversity. The artists have their own way of expressing themselves, expressing their view. Now, mind you, nothing in our museum are illegal. So we're not talking about whether legal or illegal. They're all legal. But it's not about legality now. It's about whether you think it's appropriate or whether I like it or not. And that can be very divided too. So my job is try to create this healthy platform that people can respect each other, to see from each other's point of view. But even that is not easy these days, right? So, but we need to have. I think a place like Hong Kong, if we can truly claim that we are an international city, we are a East meet West cultural hub, then we have to create that willingness to embrace that different point of view and the diversity. And that's my job, right? And it's not easy anymore, especially thanks to social media. I think social media is a main culprit of why the world is further polarized than ever. And again, not just Hong Kong. You see it in everywhere. So back to the topic. I don't want to drift this too far away from where we're heading to. But when we talk about sustainable well-being, and these are the things, I mean, I do believe arts and culture is a tool. But those tools can be weaponized, so we need to be careful. So, and other means too. Sports is one, right? There's so many other things that, let's not talk politics, right? Let's put politics away. But even putting politics away, sport, culture, art, music, they can be politicized as well if we're not managed properly. So, but to start with though, I think having even a dialogue like this is good, right? So we want to promote engagement, dialogue, so people can understand and people can respect each other's point of view. So, again, normally I would go on for a very long time since I was going to get 10 minutes. So I want to wrap this up is the world has changed. You know, by the way, before I mention the world, too often in the last couple of months, too many people came to me and say, oh, Hong Kong has changed. Hong Kong has changed. And you can tell with the tone they use, whether it's in Chinese or in English, it gives you that connotation that Hong Kong is not as good as it used to be, right? That's why Hong Kong has changed. And too often then I ask them, you know, what led you to think so? Of course, then a typical answer to that is, oh, the national security law. Now, which I will always respond to, baloney. But I understand why. It's so easy, you want a reason. So just blame it on national security law. Oh, national security law, everything changed now. Come on. I mean, deep inside, it's not about the national security law itself. But let's not even argue about that. Let's just, I mean, I don't want to go down to arguing with you whether that's the main reason. So whenever I was asked that question, I said, you know what? You know, think about it. Every person in the UK I spoke to would also tell me, UK is not the same anymore after Brexit. Same thing. I talk to all my American friends, they would say America is not the same anymore. Forever even more divided. As a matter of fact, you talk to anyone in any countries, they will say, COVID have changed everything. Right? Or I'm sure you can continue to count, oh, the food is not used to be as good now. Restaurants close up early, this and that, you know, you can go on and on. But my point is, what's the point of keep looking at how we used to be? The world has changed. We're now faced with a new norm. And we better just, I'm always an optimist because based on what I have to deal with every day, what's the point of keep complaining or keep looking at how we used to be? We got to figure out a way how to move forward. You know, no place is the same anymore as it used to be, as far as I know. So, and we need to find a way to move on. So I want to thank Rebecca for your continuous passion, because it's important, to push on this very important topic and bringing all the people into one place together. We can't solve these problems. You can't expect the government to solve every problem, and you can't expect any one individual to solve every problem. And that's why collaboration is the only way forward. Collaboration and the willingness to see from each other's perspective. And I hope we, in Hong Kong, we can embrace that, because it's only this type of attitude can help us to chart a new future for ourselves. It's not going to be easy. Nothing is going to be easy. The world is going to face with the new challenges. How do you think with these two conflicts going on in Europe and the Middle East will end? I don't even know how that will, because already with a very fragile economy and then together with these conflicts and that, you know, it's pretty grim. But said so though, it still requires us to continuously to think out of that box, to create a new future, especially for our young people. The only reason I'm still motivated to do what I do every day is no longer about us, it's about the future of the next generation. Because if every new generation, if every young people I spoke to say, oh, you know, I'm their loss. They say, I don't have a future, or there's no future for me, and so on and so on. Then we got a problem, right? I hope that everyone in this room have the same purpose here. It's for that generation to come, right? So again, I'm going to stop, and thank you everyone for allowing me to tell you how wonderful that Hong Kong I have to, sorry, I missed this important part. West Kowloon did not just come from nowhere. It took us 25 years to get here. Our first chief executive, Mr. Tong, in his policy address in 1998, first mentioned arts and culture. Obviously, he didn't have the whole idea of West Kowloon Cultural District, but he was first put in the policy address. And took us 10 years, from 98 to 2008, and a typical Hong Kong thing, you know what we do good best at? We argue. So from 98 to 2008, we argue what we want to do about it. So finally, the West Kowloon Cultural District was established in 2008, and then the rest is history. It took us this long to get to where we are, but thank goodness that we actually delivered, because the best thing happened to Hong Kong after these last 4 difficult years. The whole West Kowloon Cultural District is now our tools to reconnect back to the world. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. And if you haven't been to the West Kowloon Cultural District yet, have you been not to our museums and our performing arts venue, then you really should. Even if you, by the way, this is really last, because I have to say this, even if you don't come to enjoy our culture offerings, even if you just come to experience the art park, I just want to remind you that it is not free. Why it's not free? Because out of the 40 hectares of land, way back at the time when I was also involved in making that decision, we deliberately choose the design. It's called the art park design, because at least I was also in big belief that that is what Hong Kong people want. Today, I did not regret, but back then, no one told me how expensive it was. So I just chose it because I thought I like it. Today, I kind of like, oh no, can we afford it? Because out of the 40 hectares, 23 hectares is zoned for public open space. What does public open space mean? Well, first of all, what does 23 hectares mean out of 40? What does 23 out of 40 means? More than half is open space, meaning you cannot make money on. So already right away, half of the 40 hectares, you can't make money. So unusual Hong Kong, right? Everything we do in Hong Kong, we think about making money first. No, so half you don't make money. The remaining 17 hectares will build 850,000 square meters of GFA. Okay, that's a lot of number, right? Just think about it, 850,000. And out of that, 40% is arts and culture. M+, Palace, that's 40%. And guess what? That 40%, we don't make money. We only lose money. So today, out of the 40%, we already built 20%. Right? The Palace, the M+, the C3. And last year, our recurrent loss, 710 million Hong Kong. By the time we finish Lyric is to be open, Lyric Theatre is to be open 2025. That should add another probably 300 million. So we will have a recurrent loss of 1 billion. And that's only half finished. It will take us another 15, 20 years to finish the other half, because we still need to build the music center, the musical theater, the Broadway theater, But the more you build, the more losses, because you never make money. No one told me before that. So you don't make money. So what actually helped to sustain this thing is the other 42%, which is commercial, residential, and in other countries, I was told in America, is the big endowment to subsidize, because you only lose money, so you need subsidy. So in an American model, you need foundation, big endowment. Apparently, the European model is government subsidy. Hong Kong model, property. So unfortunately, the property is not there yet. Unfortunately, today is the worst time to talk about commercial and property. So anyway, I'll stop here. But don't worry. In 40 years' time, everything should be fine. Because after 40 years, all these commercial things will come back to us, and we will have a very healthy balance sheet to support all our arts and culture. The only problem is now between the next 40 years, then I need Donald and everybody else to help us to figure out how to do it. we have the biggest charity sitting in front of me here, so I will look to him for the solution. No, I thought you should know the background. So next time when you go to walk on the West Kowloon nice park, enjoy it because we all pay for it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Bernard Chanmurchan. Please be seated. And now we move ahead because we are about to invite Dr. Romina Boarini, Director OECD Center on Wellbeing Inclusion, to share her presentation. She's now on Zoom, so Romina, the time is yours.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. And many thanks to the Social Enterprise Summit for bringing us together around a very interesting topic, sustainable well-being. And of course, I was very interested to hear the previous speaker providing his perspective on the topic. You're going to hear something that is slightly different, however, very complementary. And I think I was interested to see that, in fact, often the bottom line is the same. So I think even if at the OECD, which is an international organization that is there to support OECD member governments, so even if our task is very much one that consists of producing data and policy advice to government, in fact, the focus on sustainable well-being comes, I would say, with recommendations and implications that are quite close to the ones that the previous speaker highlighted. I have quite a long presentation that I'm not going to run entirely because I'd like also to interact with you about the topic, but please, if you can move it to the next slide. So what I wanted to do first is to tell you about the way we measured sustainable well-being in the OECD. And from that, I wanted to say a few words around how we actually localize that concept, that notion of sustainable well-being into the Asian region, including Hong Kong. Then I wanted to tell you how we move from data to action in the realm of policy first, but then also in terms of what the private sector is doing more and more. So I'm going to give the perspective in terms of what well-being means from a corporate and investor's perspective. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Right, so in fact, for those of you who are quite familiar with the topic, you probably know that this is a topic the international community has been working on for many, many years. In this slide, I'm just summarizing the very recent initiatives. And there is quite a lot of attention at the moment within the UN, within the European Commission, within the G7, importantly. Everybody is really looking at this notion of sustainable well-being. Actually, often the word and expression that is used here is sustainable and inclusive well-being. So these two words, adjectives, sustainable and inclusive, that comes with a very specific meaning that I'm going to tell you in a minute about, and then the word well-being. So quite a lot of momentum. Actually, the momentum is growing. And at the same time, of course, as we just heard, the world is facing new challenges. And so to some extent, the question is to what extent, the new tools and frameworks that have been put forward by many countries and the international community, to what extent those frameworks actually are tools that can be useful in achieving sustainable well-being. Next slide, please. The OECD, we actually started looking into it a while ago. In 2011, we created our first piece of work on well-being. The idea there essentially was going beyond the GDP standard economic growth paradigm. We heard already, this is not about making money. Making money is important, but making money is only a means into another end. So the end, certainly from a government perspective, from a policy perspective, it is about creating conditions for people to thrive. And so the OECD looked at this again in 2011. We did a lot of work. I'm going to give you just the contours of it, very, very, I would say, synthetic information in terms of how we are mapping well-being, how we are measuring it. But more recently, 3 years ago, we decided to create the OECD Center on Wellbeing, Inclusion, Sustainable, and an Equal Opportunity WISE, which I direct. And this is a center that is trying to actually bring forward this agenda, to bring it to the next step. And so it's not just about how we measure it, but the question is, how do we action it? How do we actually implement policies that have a focus on improving people's well-being? Next slide, please. Here is, in a way, And I'm going to actually jump this one, if you don't mind. This is telling you about the origins of the framework, and I think that the organizers probably will share you the presentation, so you will read about how we came up with that framework. But because I don't have a lot of time, I prefer to move immediately to next slide, which is showing you the picture of well-being. And essentially, this is our definition, this is our framework, this is how we operationalize the notion of well-being. And in a way, this is the key slide of my presentation. So please look into the slide and kind of focus your attentions into this slide. So when we started discussing the notion of well-being in the OECD, a lot of people were highly skeptical. A lot of people were saying, this is a very subjective concept. This is something that changes, across cultures, across nations, even from one person to another. You will never come up with something that you can actually measure. And in fact, we took up that challenges, and based on a very thorough literature review, but also many other methodologies, essentially we developed such a tool. And so now 15 years, actually even more, after we launched this, we actually managed to create a very, very solid set of statistics, national statistics on well-being. The way we do that essentially starts from defining well-being, looking at what matters to people today. So this is what you can see in the slide in the upper part of the diagram. This is referred as current well-being, and that actually comprises key dimensions that really are important for people. This is both about economic well-being, so this is about economic income and wealth, work and job quality, housing, but this is also about the quality of life, the non-economic components of people's well-being. And I think, we heard it in the previous speech, some of them really matter: the education, health, of course, but also safety, social connections, the notion, of course, that people need to be feeling connected to each other, and, the level of participation into the society in many, many different ways. So this is what we consider to be current well-being. And importantly, we're not just looking at how a country is doing as a whole on those dimensions. So it's not just understanding, the aggregate conditions, but looking very much into the differences of well-being outcomes experienced by different types of the population. So here we go to the notion of inequalities, disparities, diversity. The whole point is to have granular statistics that tell us very much about how different people in the populations are doing with respect to all those important dimensions. The second part of this diagram is looking at the notion of future well-being. And the way we're doing this is to recognize that there are key resources that matter to shape what essentially will drive well-being tomorrow. And so these are natural capital, of course, the environment, all environmental stocks in this planet. This is also, of course, about economic capital, human capital, very importantly, and social capital. And so in a way, by collecting statistics for all of those dimensions, for all OECD countries, and very often, as I said, going into the granular definitions of those statistics, then we're able actually to look at how countries are doing and understanding essentially the drivers of success and what countries need to do better and more. Next slide, please. We are an international organization that is specialized in producing very, very high quality statistics. So again, when we took up the challenges of measuring well-being, we really wanted to make sure that we had the best possible statistics. And so we undertook a lot of work together with our statisticians in the national statistical offices of the OECD to ensure that we would select the best data available. So we have a number of criteria there. I don't want to detail all of them, just to tell you that essentially there is a regular work that is being done in my center to make sure that we are reviewing the statistics available. Of course, the whole point of the work we do in the OECD is to draw comparisons across countries. So importantly, all the statistics on well-being that we're using and we're analyzing are fully comparable, across the countries. Next slide, please. So since we started this work in 2011, we actually have applied the framework and we use the data in many different ways. So importantly, the main tool, I would say, or the main channel for that work essentially is a report that we produce every 2 or 3 years. It's called How is Life? And essentially that's how we're monitoring the evolution and development of well-being conditions across OECD populations. We have also developed an online index where we're actually opening up for consultation. So we're asking people, what do you think? What does what does it matter, you know, to your own well-being? What is really important? And of course, we're also applying the well-being lens to a number of important topics. Clearly, we did some analytical work to understand the impacts of the pandemic on people's well-being. Recently, and in fact, we just published done work on well-being and mental health. Mental health is becoming a huge issue in many, many OECD countries. And so we're bringing this together with well-being. And in 10 days, approximately, we're going to release our new report on well-being in a built environment, which means looking at the built environment as also a possible driver of well-being in cities. We're doing a lot of analytical and methodological work. I don't want to detail that here, but just to tell you that, of course, there continues to be some important statistical challenges. And so even if, you know, we have very, very good data at the moment and very long time series, which is obviously important for any economist, you know, and any policy analysis, it's really important to understand the trends. So even if we've done substantial progress on all of it, we continue to work to improve the data sets in a very, very continuous manner. Next slide, please. Now, importantly, since we actually started working on this, a number of OECD countries. Next slide, please. Right. So here you have just an example of how we're using the data. Okay, so this is essentially a chart that is presenting the well-being outcomes in Canada. Okay, Canada being, of course, one of our member countries. And so here you get a sense of the type of analysis that we do with the well-being outcomes data. And essentially, this, you know, you have two charts here. The first one is looking at current well-being, and the other one is telling you about resources for future well-being. So the first chart, what we call, you know, the well-being wheel, is telling you how well or not the country is doing on those various dimensions that I presented to you, and is telling you, you know, how that country actually is faring with respect to other OECD countries. OECD countries average is the benchmark there, right? And in this chart, you can see, for instance, that Canada does really well when it comes, you know, to the wealth, when it comes to things such as safety, for instance, but also, you know, the levels of education. So there are essentially the long bars that are suggestive of a very, very positive performance, but there remains a number of weaknesses that need to be addressed. Next slide, please. Right. So since we actually started the work in the OECD, we managed to get a lot of traction because in the last 10 years or so, a number of OECD countries developed similar frameworks. So in fact, today, approximately 70% of OECD countries have developed national frameworks, development plans, and other services with a well-being focus. Next slide, please. Importantly, in all those different frameworks, even if, of course, there is some differences and some cultural adjustment, I would say, of the notions of well-being, of the data being used, there is a lot of convergence, which is another very important message I wanted to give you today. Because again, you know, if people tell you sustainable well-being and well-being is something that is very, very subjective, this is not true. Well-being is much more universal than people actually mean, and this chart is telling you, because essentially shows that all important international and national initiatives are essentially expressing and measuring well-being very, very similarly. All right, I think I'm going to skip the next series of slides because I'm told that I only have a few minutes left. Apparently there is less time that was planned initially. So perhaps you can just move on to this one. And so you can just move to the section 3. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to give you a sense of how these tools and data are being used by countries. Because again, this is something that we're seeing as a growing trend. that countries are not just developing the data, the monitoring frameworks, they're actually taking this data and they use it more and more to inform the design, the evaluation, and the implementations of the policy. So, it's really data that is being turned into action. There are various different ways countries are doing so. Here, we have categorized those approaches by distinguishing essentially between four big families. There are countries essentially that are doing well-being budgeting. What it means is that they are integrating the well-being information into the definition of their national, federal, and local budgets. Another way to use the well-being information is actually to develop performance frameworks and strategic coordination plans that are organized by well-being dimensions and are underpinned by the well-being data. Yet another way to do this is actually to develop policy appraisal and evaluation tools, things such as, for instance, cost-benefit analysis, well-being impact assessment tools. And again, the whole idea of those very practical tools is that the analysis to understand, how any given policy intervention is going to have an impact on well-being, essentially is to making sure that methodology being used in those assessments is using the well-being data and principles. And the final category that we are highlighting here is what we call the broader embedding mechanisms. So these are very often cross departments and interministerial sort of platforms that have been created, or things such as, for instance, embedding well-being into the national legislation. So these are essentially all instruments, and actually more than instruments, I would say really systems of governance. So very big systems of governance that have been introduced in some places to making sure that countries could really foster well-being and could sort of look at well-being as a very, very overarching objective of what the government is doing. The next slide will tell you that, in fact, this is something that is coming to the fore, and I would say to the really upfront in the policy discussions. This year, the G7 presidency was chaired by Japan, and Japan very strongly asked us to actually develop a piece that looks at how those different well-being data methodologies are increasingly used to shape economic policy making. So this is a paper and a report that I invite you to read, because it really tells you again how those data are used to foster economic policy decision. Next slide, and maybe I'll ask you to actually, yes, why don't you jump one more, please? Because I just wanted to tell you what we're doing right now to essentially catalyze, next please, to catalyze those emerging well-being practices across countries. Next slide, please. Right, okay, so as I said, there is a lot going on, very, very strong momentum, number of initiatives, and we are lacking a hub. We are lacking a place where those initiatives come together, where the governments can exchange, they can learn from each other, they can amplify. And this is why we are going to create a new knowledge exchange platform on well-being that is going to be live in 10 days. And the whole idea essentially is to catalyze those experiences and making sure that there is a lot of knowledge that is shared across the countries, but also, of course, new knowledge, new topics are going to be addressed. Next slide, please. Okay, let me conclude by telling you what is happening in the private sector. And I'm sure this is possibly the most interesting part of the presentation for the audience that is in the room today. But to some extent, I think maybe you have not heard so much the word well-being, but of course you have heard a lot the words ESG and responsible business conduct, and essentially the idea that that companies need a social license to operate, and actually that sometimes there is strong business case for companies to also understand the social environmental inputs that they are creating. So here we are trying to use the OECD well-being methodology to address this question. What we have done essentially is to look at the impacts that businesses are making on people's well-being. And we have done that essentially by considering that there are 4 key stakeholders of corporates: the employees, the consumers, the communities, and of course the workers that work in the supply chain. So for each of those stakeholders, essentially, we have considered and mapped and looked at, what are what essentially are the implications of business operations on the well-being of those different categories. Next slide, please. So obviously, this is quite important for a number of reasons, but just to give you one very, very key example here, essentially to say that, again, there is a case, even a very, very strong economic case for companies to take this seriously. In fact, if you look at employee well-being, we know from the literature, we know from science that this has a very, very large impact on firm productivity and performance. In fact, healthy and happy workers are much more productive. They can contribute very positively to the overall firm performance. And the part of the research that we had done in the OECD consisted of unpacking that relationship and understanding the very, very clear sort of pathways that underpin that relationship. Next slide, please. And maybe you can jump by 2, and I will, in fact, stop with my next slide, please, that tells you about a very important tool. Next slide, please. Sorry, can you move by another one? Yes, I just wanted to focus your attention on this final tool that we created, because this is possibly something that could be really of direct use for all the work you are doing. So this is a new resource that the OECD created this year. And essentially, it's a tool, it's a survey that is there to measure the well-being of employees in a very, very standard way. And standardized and harmonized way. And what I mean by standardized and harmonized, what I'm saying is the idea is that the questions that we have included in this survey, so the statistics that this type of survey can generate, are very much aligned with the one that governments are defining and designing themselves. So we have run now this new survey on a number of companies in Japan. We are very keen on expanding this initial pilot. So we are in the stage where we are essentially scaling up this experience. And so again, I'd like to invite all of you to flag your interest if you want to work with us on your issue. This is a survey that can give you a number of insights on what's going on in terms of the working conditions and employees' well-being in your own company. So you can learn a lot. If you at some point see the entire presentation, I don't have the time to go through it today, but if you see the other slides that I put together, in fact, you will see a number of very interesting results that we obtained from the Japanese companies that took the survey. Quite a lot that can be learned from companies running using this tool in terms of how they can actually improve what's going on in the workplace. And I think in the current context that we heard already today a lot, meaning a context where, jobs are becoming, and, the talents are becoming very, very hard to get. And you have to sort of, as an employer, as a company, really offer the best job conditions. This type of tool is very useful to tell you, why employees may choose, one very specific job or one very specific company. So with that, let me stop here. And maybe there will be more questions during the panel discussion. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Romina, for your insightful sharing. We're going to move ahead because we are now pleased to invite architect Donald Choi Won-hing, Executive Director and Group CEO, China Chem Group Hong Kong, to the stage for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, for inviting me to participate in the summit and share my views, from the private sector side on the promotion of sustainable well-being for all. At China Chem Group, we create places with heart, which involves building sustainable development to improve people's quality of life. We believe business can be a force for good. We believe what we do matter. By working together with all the stakeholders, we believe we can aim to make a positive impact to the environment and the well-being of our community. The UN has called on all nations for urgent action to advance the 17 Sustainability Development Goals. ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages is one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that require urgent action from all of us. According to the UN Expert Group report on the integrated approaches to implementing Sustainable Development Goal 3, health is a human right, and in realizing that right, we must recognize that not everyone starts at the same place. Health equity means everyone has a fair opportunities to live a long, healthy life and should not be disadvantaged because of their income, age, gender, sexual orientation, or other factors. It is therefore essential that government, health workers, researchers, NGOs, commercial enterprises, and all stakeholders to work together to deliver and advance the well-being component of SDG 3 with minimum negative impact on the environment. How does one measure well-being? Suicide is a multidimensional malady. According to Professor Edwin Snyman, who was an expert on the relation between mental health and suicide, to take one's own life is a great tragedy and could be viewed as making a negative score on the well-being scale. And for the purpose of today's presentation, I'm going to use the suicide rate as a proxy indicator for the state of mental health and personal subjective psychological well-being. Therefore, it is alarming to note that the elderly suicide rate in Hong Kong has been climbing in recent years. In 2022, 44% of the recorded suicide cases involved people aged 60 or above. It is the highest since records began in 1973. Obviously, psychological general well-being is subjective. Given the same physical and environmental conditions, different people may consider their well-being level differently. The World Health Organization uses the 5 Well-being Index to gauge the relative level of personal well-being. It would be a useful tool for all of us to understand our mental health. Are we in cheerful and in good spirit? Do we feel calm and relaxed but full of energy? Are we still looking forward to each new day and continue to be curious? I hope all of us can answer the above with a big positive yes. We need to manage our emotion and anxiety to achieve sustainable well-being. There are many complicated factors affecting our well-being. Our physical health would affect our mental health. At the same time, sound mind, sound body. There are also non-sustainable spending habits or changes in our daily life and relationship with our loved one that could destroy our values and confidence in our ability to achieve future happiness. So what we can do together to improve our own and as well as community well-being, especially for the aged populations. In the latest policy address, I'm happy to note that the government has committed to improve the physical living environment by incorporating the concept of universal design and accessibility into the building design manual developed by the building department. A comfortable and safe living environment for the elderly goes a long way in improving the user's well-being. Better caring service and community-based peer support service for carers would also be implemented as stated in the policy address. Government has a responsibility to enhance its citizens' well-being. In terms of support to the elderly, I believe government can further develop policy to facilitate the sustainable development of senior housing and encourage the private sector to get involved more. In the Senior Housing Report published by the Urban Land Institute in October 2023, it has been observed that unlike Singapore and Australia and other places, Hong Kong did not have special supportive policy for senior housing. So this is an area that Hong Kong government can do much more. Some suggestions in the report include more specific land use policies, incentives for the inclusion of senior-friendly design features, and improved healthcare subsidy scheme with private operators. In the report, it also makes suggestions on how the private sector can contribute more, like the development of intergenerational communities, add-on services for senior residents, greater use of technology to ease the workload on caretakers. I would like to share with you what we are doing at Chinacam Group to support sustainable well-being for all, especially for the aged population group of our community. Our effort is focused in 4 areas: places with heart development, where our building design is people-centric; caring property services, to provide personalized services to the residents; friendly linear hospitality, where guests are treated as part of the family; and CGG Healthcare, a division that we formed recently with the aim to make a difference in how services to the elderly could be delivered. We are working hard to create a more agreeable housing ecosystem that involves independent living, quality RCHE, and aging in place. The home design is not only comfortable and safe, but hope to inspire positive energy. Last year, we have acquired Pine Care Group, an elderly service group that has been established in Hong Kong for over 30 years, with the aim to set a new standard in Hong Kong's elderly care industry. But well-being is not only about physical comfort. As Bernard has mentioned, art and culture plays an important part. Isolation and loneliness affect mental health. We believe in the power of music, arts, and culture could promote the mental health and inject positive energy into our society. So in collaboration with community organizations, various art institutions, and commercial organizations and NGOs, we have organized many community activities like music therapy workshop, French Maid in Central Market, reading as Asian Art Archive, etc., etc., with the goal to bringing the community together to show that no one is alone and no one will be left behind. Aligning actors around the promotion of sustainable well-being for all means collaboration among all stakeholders. To facilitate the collaboration between corporations, NGOs, and citizens of our communities, we have recently launched an CRM app called CCG Hearts. It is different from the traditional spend and earn shopping mall reward program because CCG Hearts encourages members to actively participate in community volunteer services, and their good works and time spent on volunteer work would be rewarded in our program with incentive, so they can actually, while do good and receive reward as well. At Chinacam Group, we are not NATO, no action, talk only. We walk our talk. We have a North Star to guide us, which is our triple bottom line approach to business. Our 3 Ps value is about people, the positive social impact that we can bring to our community, prosperity, creating economic benefit and share value for our society and planet, a sustainable and better world for our future generations. We are places with heart builder with the aim to promote well-being for all. So with joint efforts among government, NGOs, corporations, and all stakeholders, I'm sure that we can work together to improve the well-being for all. And I look forward to our future collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Architect Donald Choi. Please remain on stage with me. Please remain on stage with me. We're going to continue on to our next section. Because moving ahead right now, we're going to have a little discussion. And for this, I would like to invite Ms. Dorothy Lam, co-founder and chief catalyst, Dream Impact Hong Kong, come join me on stage, as well as Mr. Dennis Wu, chief executive officer and executive director of Allied Sustainability and Environmental Consultants Group Limited, Hong Kong, to facilitate this next part. So Dorothy and Dennis, I'm going to hand over the stage to both of you. Let's continue on this section and take it away. Enjoy the discussion.
Thank you, Vivek. And thank you, Romina, from dialing in online, and also Bernard, who has to leave a little earlier. So we have a discussion with Dennis, our co-facilitator, yes, and Donald in person. So just to get a quick sense of people in the room, who's from social enterprise sector? Maybe raise your hand. You might have multiple roles, so that's okay. So social enterprise. What about corporates? Ooh, okay, cool. What about NGO, nonprofit sector? Wow. And the government? Right. Academia? Woo, okay, some academics in the room as well. So just to get a sense of who we're talking to and you know, what kind of questions will be coming in. So we can take a seat. And to warm up the space, actually I was going to do a 1-minute meditation. But actually instead, why don't we do a quick stand up for a second? Everybody stand up. And you know, we're talking about well-being, so we can't sit all day in a conference, right? So just turn a little bit, you know, and say hi to the person next to you. So say hi. How are you doing? Yes, that's good. Okay, may you share one word of how you're feeling right now with the person next to you. One word, how you're feeling.
Good.
Go for it. How are you feeling? Good. Good. Excited.
Good.
If you don't have a friend, turn around to the back. Okay.
How
Great.
about selfie?
Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Great. So, Romina, how are you feeling? One word.
Sleepy.
Yeah, different
Yes,
time
the
zone.
time zone difference. So, okay, thank you, everyone. You can take a seat. You know, so much about well-being is that connection. When you feel connected to someone, I love the 5 dimensions on well-being. Do you feel relaxed? Are you rejuvenated? So I hope that, you know, this conference is really for all of you to make new connections. I'll start with a question to Romina. I think I really like your point about how we think about measuring well-being and oftentimes how it's subjective, but you've noticed that across different countries, it's actually quite aligned in different ways they measure. And then in terms of implementation, how have you seen different countries and companies take the framework, the Wellbeing Index, and implement it locally? So we want to bring that to Hong Kong, right? How can Hong Kong also implement that locally?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think indeed I started from sort of the fact that in a way the components of well-being are the basic ingredients of well-being are very, very much the same across countries, and in fact we have evidence that suggests it's also true across time and history. However, then especially when it comes indeed to actual implementation, and that means, you know, the actual measurements, but also, you know, the policy design, you know, the type of actions you put in place. Obviously, it needs to be very much contextualized. And the way you do that, essentially, is that you try to understand what specific dimensions matter more than others. And you then define tools in a way that embed that difference, I would say, that very, very sort of contextual information. You know, there are many different ways in which countries are doing it, and even corporates are doing it. It's true that there are sort of common elements that emerge into it. So I would say that generally speaking, even in the very, very concrete actual implementation, there is always this consideration of both sort of economic and non-economic. And in the non-economic sphere, there is quite a lot around relational. right? And so you were talking already about indeed connections, connectedness. Now, in terms of Hong Kong, there are factors I think that strike me as being quite specific, perhaps to the context of Asia. And so I would say that probably they are very meaningful. They would be very meaningful to incorporate in anything that Hong Kong needs to do and want to do on the topic. And I'm thinking about this idea of harmony and balance, but also connectedness to the nature. These are things that in Asia are quite strong. And, we just run a number of consultations with our stakeholders in the regions that tell us, you should put a little bit more of that in your sort of framework in the OECD, because our framework is still a little bit too Western, if I may say. And so this idea of looking at, this equilibrium in life, so again, harmony, balance, but also how people feel close to the nature, especially in a very, very dynamic place like Hong Kong, where, of course, you have very vibrant economy. And so, you get to sort of, I guess, face a number of very, very concrete constraints in terms of how you sort of balance your time between work and private life. And then you must make sure that you also have time and space, where you can reconnect, to the others. I was also interested, in the first speech we heard in the session to hear about the notions of families, and this is true. I mean, it's not just as a way to attract people to Hong Kong. I think it's obviously so important to think in terms of what really underpins the well-being of the community, and very often this is actually coming by and through the families. And so thinking about the very specific needs that families need, to make sure that they are obviously raising their children in the best possible way.
Yes, I think the how can we? I love that Hong Kong is this East meets West center where it's not only learning from the West, but also incorporating our own values like balance and harmony. How can we use more Laozi and different of our own philosophies into corporate sustainability? That we're not only looking at Western cultures, but also implementing and making it our own. So maybe we'll pass to Dennis.
Yeah, my turn now. I would like to ask Donald. I know that you are very well-known sustainability leaders and also professional architect, and maybe learn from you that how does purpose-driven companies like China Camps to drive cross-sectors collaborations, how to have innovation, thinking out of the box, and also how to drive the resources, because like capitals, like capital markets money, towards sustainability, because like we have very not clear definitions of sustainability, the social KPI and well-being KPIs, how to measure and benchmarking. And definitely you have a lot of incredible ideas from just developers to add elderly services and also have healthcare services to the group as well. So may we learn from you now?
Well, I think successful companies, if you look at their work, they all contribute to the welfare of the community and society. I don't think any selfish company can exist, and successful for a long time, because to enable the company, the business to function, they need the loyalty of their customers. And customers obviously look after their own well-being. So, in having the service or product from the commercial corporation, they need to realize the value. And on that basis, every company has a purpose. And obviously, as I mentioned just now, if they just look after their own interests, then their business couldn't last. They need to create a common value, a common kind of aligned interest for the customers, and the customer is part of the community and society. So that is where I think the ESG the common goal actually makes sense for a lot of private corporations. So it's not just saying that I'm doing good for the community, it's actually doing good for themselves as well. As to how we can channel more investment into the community goods works. Again, I think the concept, the mind change of making the pie larger need to be understood by everyone. Right? We are not actually trying to fight for a bigger piece of a limited pie. Right? That is a zero-sum game. That is no kind of additional value. Because if I get more, I mean, you will be getting less. I mean, this is not the model that we are working on. We are trying to actually enlarge the pie so that everybody will get more. So again, if we have that mindset change, then capital will actually naturally flow into the area. We can make additional value. We can make the pie bigger for everyone.
I think that leads into my question about having the long-term mindset. Romina also mentioned that in her research, that to shift into incorporating budgeting into action plan for well-being really requires the company to have this long-term mindset. Would like to ask both of you, how can we also incentivize SMEs? Because I think majority of the economies actually consist of SMEs, and we have great corporations and listed companies leading the way to budget that into their action. So what about SMEs? Hong Kong, I think a lot of SMEs are fighting to survive, and how can we actually tell them, I like the report that Romina also said, happier employees are more productive, right? So how can we show or incentivize SMEs to also incorporate well-being into their work, into their business, yeah? For both either speakers, yeah.
Well, I think, the work for future is changing, as well as the business model and the workplace actually will be disrupted, again and again. If we look at COVID have accelerated the remote working regime, which actually allow now a lot of employees to work at their own kind of most productive hours and places. That actually create a lot of opportunities for SME as well. Because one, the relationship between an employee and employers no longer is location fixed, then they can be their own kind of SME operator to a certain extent. And I do see that for a lot of corporations as well. There are so many changes and uncertainties. Therefore, they are very conscious on their overhead. And they would actually prefer maybe outsource some of the services to SME, to special talents, and therefore very much work collaboratively rather than having a centralized control and a top-down management. And that, I think, is the future of work. We no longer actually just work for one kind of boss. We can work for many, many bosses and offering our value.
Or more flexibility. What about Romina? Any thoughts on implementing the OECD framework and also from the corporations to SME level?
Yeah, no, I think obviously the constraints, I would say, the constraints of SMEs is that they obviously have less capacity in a number of ways. I mean, they're very strong. I mean, they have obviously strong assets and strong advantages. Very often they're extremely dynamic. They can bring quite a lot. They're very, very and definitely they need to be very strategic and selective, meaning that, and that's I think one of the challenge, one of the risks when you start taking well-being seriously is that it's very, it's very big. It comes with a lot of data and information on sort of demands, and also in terms of your actions, it is very, very ambitious. And so the SMEs, I think they really, really would need to sort of focus on a very few objectives, but what is important very there, so my answer is really what governments can do for them, because very often governments have very important instruments, for instance, public procurement, that can be totally tailored and addressed, to the SMEs, and those instruments can provide very strong incentives to SMEs to, again, be very selective in the way they articulate the business models, but on making sure that their actual inputs on the environment and the people, the workers, the communities they're serving, those are all positive. So definitely governments has a lot to do to incentivize and make life sort of more simple for SMEs, and they can either in some OECD countries, governments can also use R&D credits, tax credits as a way to incentivize, and again they can do that specifically for SMEs. If you actually look at industrial policies in OECD countries, the trend was one where in recent years that industrial policy was very much skewed towards the big companies, the multinationals, and that was an issue in many ways. And so first of all would be to redirect some of that aid to SMEs, obviously in a way that is healthy and that is effective in incentivizing, not locking in, but on the other hand, sort of unlocking the potential for SMEs to actually be very strong contributors to sustainable well-being. So I think there are a number of possibilities there. Just to finish on your point on the long-term mentality, this is so important because obviously, we're talking about sustainable well-being. So by definition, we're talking about something that requires to have a very, very large, time horizon. We haven't talked a lot about today sort of the environment, all the pressures in terms of climate change. But I think that obviously the best important example one may sort of raise about the reason to go long term. I think this is one of the big failures of the economic models, the economic systems, and the social systems that obviously were very much short-sighted and very much sort of biased towards sort of the maximization of either profit or consumptions in today, without the consideration of obviously the inputs in the long term. So I think all actors really need to take this long-term mentality into considerations, and typically considering obviously inputs on children, on future generations. And again, the way we do it in the OECD is really looking at the capitals, how the capitals of different type of nature, economic, environmental nature, human capital, how those evolve in the very sort of long run, and what are the best factors of success behind that evolution.
Thank you, Romina. And as mentioned by Bernard, our world is changing. So we need to treat the world as the way we treat climate change. Even in social aspects, we will have social resilience and social adaptation. For example, we have a very high suicide rate. So we for resilience, we try to reduce the damage, and for adaptation, we should have more programs to support the social areas. And I know, Donald, you did a lot of many changes to the groups and give some innovation ideas. And during the process, I think you may face a lot of challenges, and people's normally will adopt no change. Yeah, how can you overcome those barriers and
Well, I think, everyone is kind of afraid to change. But we know that we need to change. So how we can get over this anxiety, first of all, we don't do it in isolation. We talk among friends. We share ideas. We want to get everybody on board by understanding what is the benefit of change. So we are not changing for change's sake, right? there must be a benefit, for change. And how we can give confidence is to see how we can have kind of low-hanging fruits to demonstrate that the change does work, and we can then move forward to bigger changes and so on. So I think, don't be too ambitious in, making drastic changes, tomorrow and getting the result immediately. Rome is not made in one day, right? We need to have patience, but as long as our goal is clear and we continue to move forward every day, then we will make that change happen.
How about Romania? When you face a lot of challenges in adaptations, OECD, how can you overcome those barriers as well?
Well, I think, I want to go back to this point of change and culture change, because what we sort of one of the big lessons, I think, from looking at the experiences of country initiatives on well-being is that you need a bit of time. I mean, before they really sort of translate into the actual reality and kind of permeate the sort of the various policy systems. And so it's really sort of the shift of culture and what happens in the sort of reality of the workplaces, but also in the tools that people use, etc., etc. And of course, a challenge there. And that takes time, right? And so the challenge is how you make that change also agile, in the sense that clearly, there are new challenges to face. I mean, this is really true for governments, for corporates. The sort of COVID first, then the war, the sort of the cost of living crisis. So how you actually you keep this sort of set of tools and kind of mentality focusing on promoting people's well-being, but how you make it evolving based on obviously the new challenges. This is not easy. I think the solution there is to try to do two things. First of all, you need, so I would certainly think you need a little bit of stability, especially when it comes to the data, to the KPI. So making sure that you don't change your measures and indicators every time, so that you need to understand what drives change in the medium term. But in terms of the stories, in terms of the narratives, it is quite important that obviously that is appreciative of the new challenges that are sort of coming up. So and then the question of how you actually do that across the sectors, right? And so in fact, this is not something that governments or businesses or investors or civil society can ever do alone. And so that's constant working together, making sure that you're connecting all the dots and all the parts, because change obviously is very complex, especially in this very dynamic context. And so you want to make sure that you have those very, very stable platforms in the sense, you want to create those hubs where people can work together on how to address the new challenges.
Great. As we're using up more time than we're expected, maybe we'll and Donald has another appointment, so maybe we'll end with one sentence for Donald. And we have a few questions from the audience. Maybe we'll have Romina just answer that. But what would be one tip for the audience about collaboration? Finding the right partners and working across sectors.
Well, trust. I think we need to trust our partner. When we collaborate, we need to have trust in each other to deliver, and their goals should be aligned.
Thank you.
Thank you. And sorry that I need to leave a little bit earlier.
Yeah, do we have time for Q&A? Or 5 minutes, okay. Any questions from the audience? We really want this to be a dialogue. So we have Romina, who's dialing in. She previously worked on a lot of policies work before joining the OECD, and now leading OECD. This center, WISE, just started in 2011, focusing on well-being. Where OECD is focusing mostly on economic growth. How can we actually integrate well-being into the whole economic agenda? So questions, feel free to scan or even just raise your hands if you have any questions for Romina. So last few seconds for any audience. If not, there's one lady in the back.
Hi, thank you. So Dr. Romina actually mentioned that to have a well-being life, we should have people should feel connected to nature. So I feel like the younger generation is, especially post-COVID, are not open to heading to the parks or mingling with friends. So can you give some ideas on how we can implement the desire for connecting with nature? Because Hong Kong is surrounded by beautiful scenery and everything, but how can we implement this at a young age for kids to have the desire to, go hiking or, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think I would say, there are three things. One is, first of all, it very much depends obviously on the places themselves. I mean, there are cities where, one of the challenges today is to create green spaces and sort of parks and other sort of, green amenities where people can go. And again, so there is a question also of the easiness, the accessibility of those parks for people. So there is quite a lot, I think, that urban design can do in that respect. So you can really shape the living environment, the built environment in a city in such a way to encourage, that connections with nature. The second is in terms of, how you change the behaviors. I think definitely, educational policy in the schools and a big role there to play, from very, very young ages. You can ensure that, schools, obviously, I mean, it would be great if all schools would have their own sort of, green space, but if not possible, try to encourage schools to, to really, really bring children outside as much as possible. And the third sort of factor I would highlight is obviously, the role that parents can play there. Because this is about raising children, giving them sort of those type of values. And I think it's clear that you do implement the change again from when they're very, very young. I think in general, in many countries today, you see a lot of campaigns, that very often are public campaigns. So, governments sort of put in place those to encourage children to do that. Probably this is not done enough, could be done more. And so that connects me a bit with the sort of the issue of sports, art and culture. I mean, that I haven't actually talked a lot about it, but if you allow me, Dorothy, I may say a couple of words, because I think obviously sports is also there. The way to do this, especially outdoor sports, I mean, it's obvious that they can bring people more connected and closer to nature. Arts and culture, there again, I mean, there is now a new trend in arts and culture where it's really about making sure that this is, again, very, very embedded in nature and very, very connected, with green spaces. So that's one way. And I wanted to say that, in the framework that we use in the OECD, so we don't have arts and culture as a category. This is not because we don't think this is important. Actually, it's very important. The reasons why it wasn't incorporated when the framework was created a few years ago is because we were lacking internationally comparable measures of arts and culture. I didn't say, but in the data sets that underpin our work, we have more than 80 indicators, and as I said, they're all international comparable. So still, we don't have good measures of art and cultures that would tell us, the experience of art and culture in OECD countries. Those exist at national level, and this is why you have countries such as Italy, for instance, that have, produced their own well-being monitoring framework, where one of the pillars is actually art and culture and heritage. Of course, this is so important, and I believe, in fact, that UNESCO, as you know, is the UN agency that has a lead on everything that concerns art and culture. They are also doing very interesting work connecting well-being and art and culture. So certainly the fact that, we're not looking into it in the OECD, or at least not in that framework, because in fact, in parallel, we're doing some interesting work that connects the two, but let's say it's not in our central framework, it's just because at the moment we're lacking the data.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Romina Boarini, for your insightful sharing. And I'd like to also thank Ms. Dorothy Lam, as well as Mr. Dennis Wu, as well as architect Donald Choi for joining us today. So thanks so much. One more time, let them hear it. Fantastic sharing over there. Nice and clear. You may please be seated. Now for